You are standing on a bridge at 3 in the morning. The water beneath you is perfectly still. You cannot remember walking here. There is a child in front of you, and she is pointing at the surface of the pond, and she is saying, "What about the others?" And when you follow her finger downward, you understand, with a certainty that bypasses every rational thought you have ever had, that you are not looking at reflections. You are looking at faces. And one of them is familiar. Look away. Look away right now. Because the moment you recognize that face, you will understand what has actually been happening for the last 3 days, what it means that the door opened by itself, what it means that your mother's arms felt different when she held you, what it means that the house was warm when it should have been cold and empty and locked. You will understand. And understanding will not help you at all. His name was Yusuf, and the last time he had seen Kashmir it had been summer. He was 20 years old then. The kind of young where you believe the version of yourself that is leaving is not the person who will have to come back. He had packed a single bag. He had told himself it was temporary, just long enough to earn money, just long enough to stabilize things, just long enough that his parents would stop choosing between eating and keeping the lights on. He had told himself he would call every week. He called less and less until calling felt like a wound he was reopening rather than a wound he was trying to close. It is easier, when you are ashamed of being absent, to remain absent. This is a logic that makes no sense until you are inside it. Then it makes perfect, devastating sense. So 20 years passed. He lived in New York. He had an apartment in Queens, a job in logistics, a city that had slowly stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like the place where his actual life happened. He was 40 years old. He had photographs of his parents on his refrigerator, slightly yellowed at the edges, printed from digital files he had never updated past the year 2005. The call came on a Tuesday morning in the year 2010. His father was ill. Not slightly ill, the kind of ill where the person calling does not say the word dying but structures every sentence around it like a frame around an empty space. Yusuf booked a flight within the hour. He did not pack slowly. He did not deliberate. He just moved, the way people move when they have been waiting for permission to finally do the thing they should have done long ago. He landed in New Delhi. He did not stop. He arranged a car north toward Kashmir the same afternoon, watching the landscape change through the window, the plains flattening into foothills, the foothills rising into something older and colder and more serious than anything New York had ever shown him. 20 years. He kept running that number through his mind, trying to feel its actual weight. 20 years he had left when his parents were still capable of running a household, capable of arguing, capable of laughing loudly enough that the neighbors knocked on the wall. Now his father was in a bed somewhere in that house, and Yusuf was in a car, and the mathematics of his absence felt, for the first time, genuinely catastrophic. When the familiar streets of his old neighborhood came into view, something in him physically loosened. The shops were exactly where he had left them. The same cramped row of storefronts along the same narrow lane, the same hand-painted signs in faded Urdu, the same smell of cardamom and pinewood smoke that he had carried in the back of his memory for 2 decades without knowing he was carrying it. The corner shop where he had spent his pocket money on biscuits and sweet chai, still there, though it was the son now behind the counter, not the father. The boy Yusuf remembered playing with in that same doorway, now a grown man, running the shop his father had left him. Some things hold, Yusuf thought. The thought felt like relief. He was not yet asking what it would mean if the things that appeared to hold were only holding in his memory. He was not yet thinking about that. He noticed the window as the car stopped in front of the house. Just for a moment. Just a flash of something, a smear on the glass, the kind left by two open palms pressed flat. He registered it the way you register a word you cannot immediately translate, present, noted, filed away. He was focused on the front door. He was focused on seeing his parents. He got out of the car. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Then again. The neighborhood seemed to be watching him with an attention that felt slightly wrong. A few people at the edge of the lane, standing still in the way that people stand still when they are waiting to see what will happen rather than simply going about their day. Yusuf turned to leave, thinking he would try again in the evening. The door opened behind him. Not inward, slowly, the way a person opens a door. It swung open in one fluid movement, as though the pressure behind it had suddenly equalized. There was no wind. The trees at the edge of the road were not moving. He told himself, old door. Old hinges. Probably the latch had not caught when someone last closed it, and the weight of his knocking had been enough to finally push it free. This is how we handle things that do not fit. We reach for the explanation that requires the least restructuring of everything else we believe. Yusuf was a man who had spent 20 years in New York. He was a man who believed in logistics and timetables and sensible explanations. He carried his bags inside. His mother was upstairs. His father too. Both of them so diminished by illness that the sight of them hit Yusuf like a physical impact. These were not the people in the yellowed photographs on his refrigerator. These were smaller people, quieter people, people with the specific exhaustion of those who have spent a long time fighting something they cannot see. But his mother rose when she saw him. She crossed the room and held him with both arms, her thin hands pressing into his back, and Yusuf felt 20 years collapse into nothing. He was home. Whatever home had become, he was in it. He did not sleep well that first night. He told himself it was jet lag, the 16-hour displacement of his body clock trying to recalibrate. He got up somewhere near midnight to fill his water bottle from the kitchen. The house was silent in the deep, structural way that old houses are silent, not empty silent, but full of small sounds that the silence made visible. The settle of wood. The faint rhythm of wind finding gaps in the framing. And then a different sound. From his right. From the direction of the window facing the side of the house. Not wind. Not settling. A sound like deliberate pressure being applied to glass, a slow, sustained resistance. Yusuf turned and looked and stood very still. 2 handprints on the window. Palms flat, fingers spread, both hands pressed against the outside of the glass. The size of an adult's hands. The moisture from the contact still present, still fresh enough to be visible. And the prints were not on one window. They were on the window beside it, too. And the one beside that. As though someone outside, in the darkness, had moved slowly along the wall from one window to the next, pressing both palms against each pane as they passed. His water bottle hit the floor. He was upstairs before he consciously decided to move. The next morning he told his mother. She listened without surprise. Without the response he had expected, the "Oh Yusuf, you were half asleep, you imagined it," that would have landed like absolution. Instead she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The neighbor. The man who lived 2 houses down. His wife had passed away not long after they were married, a young woman, gone too soon, and since then he had not been well." Not dangerous, his mother said quickly, but not entirely himself either. He wandered. Day and night. He would end up in people's gardens, at their doors, looking through their windows without quite understanding why. She said this matter-of-factly, the way you describe the weather in a place where the weather is simply what it is. Yusuf felt the tightness in his chest slowly release. A man. A grieving, unwell man, not something from another world. Not the half-formed thing his mind had begun building in the dark of the kitchen. He was relieved. He was so relieved that he did not notice the thing that should have bothered him. He had seen the handprints moving from window to window along the outside of the house. If the neighbor had pressed his hands against the glass as he walked, he would have had to walk along the outer wall of the house, in the dark, without making a sound. Yusuf did not think about this. He was too busy being relieved. That afternoon, an invitation arrived from his friend Tariq, a gathering that evening at another friend's house. Half the old group would be there. People Yusuf had not seen in 20 years, people he had grown up with, people who had been part of him when he was the version of himself that still lived here. He told his parents he was going. His father, who had barely spoken since Yusuf arrived, turned his head slowly from the pillow and said, "Be home before midnight." The words were not delivered as parental habit. They were delivered as something more specific. As instruction. As warning. His father's eyes were focused in a way they had not been since Yusuf arrived, clear, direct, insistent. Whatever you are doing, wherever you are going, before midnight. Something bad might happen. Yusuf wanted to ask what he meant. But his father had already closed his eyes again, and his mother was shaking her head slightly, the small gesture that had always meant he is tired, let him rest, we can talk later. He went to the party. He told himself he would be home well before midnight. The evening ran away from him the way evenings do when you are suddenly, unexpectedly happy, surrounded by familiar faces and familiar voices and the specific comfort of being known by people who knew you before you knew yourself. The hours dissolved. When Yusuf finally checked his watch, it was already midnight, and then it was past, and then a young man named Danish found him at the edge of the room and said something that cut through the noise. "Go home," Danish said. Now. Before it gets later, Yusuf laughed. He was full of warmth and old memories, and he did not want to hear anything that disrupted it. Danish did not laugh back. He told Yusuf about the bridge. The Gaucatal Bridge. The one Yusuf would have to cross to get home. There was no other route, not at this hour. In 1990, Danish said, 50 people had been killed there in a single night. Not in ones and twos, together, at once, on a bridge over water in the dark. It was said that the bridge remembered. That whatever had been released there had never entirely left. That people passing at night heard things. Saw things. That the things they saw were not from the world of the living. Yusuf told him it was a myth. He said it with affection and firmness, the way you dismiss a story that someone is clearly enjoying too much in the telling. Danish looked at him with an expression that was not the expression of someone enjoying a story. It was 3 a.m. before Yusuf left. The party had emptied while he wasn't paying attention. He did not know exactly when, could not say at what point the room had gone from full to empty. Just him and the darkness and the car, and the road north toward home. His mind kept returning to what Danish had said despite himself. The specific arithmetic of 1990. 50 people. One night. A bridge over water. He saw her before he reached the bridge. A child. standing at the edge of the road where the bridge began, in the dark, crying. Not sobbing, the quieter kind of distress that sounds worse because it has been going on for a long time. A girl, perhaps 9 or 10, alone at the side of a road at 3 in the morning with a cremation ground at her back. He stopped the car. He told himself it did not matter what Danish had said, it did not matter what time it was, it did not matter what his father had said, because there was a child in the road. And he was not the kind of person who drives past a child crying at the side of a road in the dark. He got out. He asked why she was crying. She said she could not find her parents. She said she had been looking for them for a long time, but she kept hearing their voices and they kept calling to her and she could not find where they were. She pointed to the pond beside the bridge. He looked. 2 shapes on the surface. He moved closer without deciding to move. The shape of 2 people, floating face up in the still black water. He reached for his jacket. He was already calculating the distance, the depth, what it would take to reach them when the girl's hand closed around his wrist. "You could save those 2, she said. "But what about the others?" He looked at the pond. He had seen 2. Now he was seeing 40. 50. A surface that should have been black water and was instead covered, entirely, in faces turned upward. 40 or 50 people floating in complete stillness in a pond that was not large enough to contain them, in the dark, on a night without moon. He ran. He did not make a decision to run. He was simply in the car, door locked, engine on, hands gripping the wheel with a force that would leave impressions in his palms for days. He drove without looking at the road on either side. He drove with his eyes straight ahead, and even then, in his peripheral vision, the road was wrong, a darkness along the margins that was not shadow, a movement that had no source, a wetness on the asphalt that made no sense in a night without rain. He did not look directly at it. He hammered on the door of his parents' house until his hands hurt. No answer. He hammered again. The sound of his knocking traveled in the cold night air and came back changed, as though something in the darkness between the houses was absorbing it and returning it altered. He was outside in the cashmere cold in a thin jacket, alone, and the neighborhood that had seemed warm and unchanged when he arrived was showing him a different face now, the face it wore after midnight, the face it had learned during years Yusuf had not been here to understand. A figure was approaching. Coming down the lane from the direction of the neighbor's house. Coming directly toward Yusuf's door. Not looking at Yusuf. Moving past him to the windows, pressing close to the glass, peering through. Yusuf grabbed the man's arm. He demanded an answer. He had had enough. He had driven through the worst night of his life and he was cold and shaking and he wanted the explanation that would make all of it hold still and make sense. He said, "This is my parents' house. I have watched you doing this for days. What are you looking for?" The man turned and looked at him. He said, "Which parents?" He said it quietly. Not unkindly. As though he was genuinely trying to understand what Yusuf was referring to. Then he said the thing that pulled the floor out. He said, "No one has lived in this house for 20 years. We have been watching you for days, knocking, calling out, going in and out, talking to yourself in an empty house, in the dark. The neighbors were worried. That is why I have been watching. Not to frighten you. To make sure nothing happened to you, *. Yusuf said, "You're lying." But his voice did not sound certain. His voice sounded like a man already knowing, already assembling, already understanding what the assembling meant. The man sat him down on the step, the step of the house that Yusuf had been entering and exiting for 3 days, the house he had knocked on and entered and eaten in and slept in and climbed the stairs up to find his parents in a room on the first floor. The man said it plainly. 20 years ago, in 1990, there had been a protest at the Gaucatal Bridge. 50 people had been killed. Among those 50 people, Yusuf's parents. They had gone. They had been part of the crowd on the bridge that night. They had not come home afterward. The house had been locked ever since. Yusuf sat with this. His mother's arms around him. Her voice saying his name. The warmth of the house that should have been cold and locked. The door that opened by itself when he turned away. The hands on the windows, his father's hands, pressing against glass from the inside, trying to look out at the son who had finally come home. His father's voice from the pillow, asterisk before midnight. Something bad might happen, asterisk. His father knew what was on that bridge at midnight. His father knew, because his father had been there. His father had been telling him, in the only way available to him, not to go near the place where it had happened. And the little girl at the edge of the water. What about the others? She was not asking Yusuf to save the others. She was asking if he understood. If he would look. If he was finally ready to see what was in that pond, in that water, at the foot of the bridge where 50 people had gone and not come back, the accumulated weight of everything unresolved, everything unlived, everything that had never been given the permission to finish. And somewhere in that number, 2 people who had been waiting 20 years for their son to come home. He had come home. He just had not understood which home he was arriving at. Yusuf went back to New York. There is no other ending that is also true. He left Kashmir with 3 days remaining on his trip, the days he had planned to spend with the parents he had been so certain he was visiting. He returned to his apartment in Queens, to the job in logistics, to the photographs on the refrigerator. The same photographs. Yellowed at the edges. His parents' faces looking out at him from a year that no longer existed. He did not take the photographs down. He did not put new ones up either. There were no new ones. There would not be new ones. The record had closed in 1990, while he was in a city on the other side of the world, working and calling less and telling himself there would be time. The shop on the corner was still there. The son of the old shopkeeper, running it now. That detail that had made him feel, when he first arrived, that some things hold. He had taken it as comfort. He had let it mean, asterisk, the neighborhood remembers you. The neighborhood waited, asterisk. What it actually meant was, the neighborhood continued without him. The son replaced the father, the way that happens, the way things pass on without asking anyone's permission. The shop was there. Everything else had changed, or ended, or gone somewhere that ordinary living cannot follow. The weight Yusuf carried back to New York was not the weight of having seen something impossible. It was the weight of having been seen, recognized, reached for, held, by people who had every reason to stop waiting and had not. He had arrived 3 days after he should have arrived 20 years earlier. He had arrived at a house he could only enter because the door had been opened for him. He had sat with his mother, who held him with both arms and pressed her thin hands into his back, and he had not known enough to understand what the thinness meant, the specific thinness of something that is made of something other than body. He had not known. He knows now. And the knowing is a different kind of company than the not knowing was. He is not certain which one he would have chosen, if he had been given the choice. There is something worth sitting with after a story like this. Not the supernatural architecture of it, not the bridge or the pond or the figures at the windows. Those are the containers for the thing, not the thing itself. The thing itself is simpler and harder. Yusuf spent 20 years telling himself there would be time. Not because he was careless or cold, he was not either of those things. He spent 20 years in the ordinary human negotiation between the life you are building and the life you left behind, between the love that requires presence and the fear of what presence might cost you after so long away. He did not call because calling felt like accounting for the silence before it. He did not visit because visiting felt like measuring a distance he had allowed to grow too large. And then he arrived too late, and the extraordinary mercy of that story, if mercy is the right word, is that too late was not the same as never. Whatever remains of the people we have loved, whatever portion of them persists in the places they occupied and the houses they kept warm, it waited. Not with accusation. Not with the account of all the missed years laid out for reckoning. Just with the door opened and the stairs waiting and two people in a room who were glad that their son had finally come home. Most of us have someone we have been meaning to call. Someone the distance has grown strange with. Someone we have photographs of that have not been updated. Someone we will call when things settle, when work is less, when the timing is right, when we find the words for the specific apology the silence has earned. There is no night, sitting in the quiet of whatever room you are in right now, when that call cannot be made earlier than you planned. Make it earlier than you planned. Because the only thing more haunting than the story of Yusuf standing outside a locked house in the cold, finally here, finally home, is the version of the story where whatever was waiting inside had already stopped waiting. That version of the story does not have a bridge you have to cross. It is just silence. Just an unanswered phone. Just photographs that stay yellowed on the refrigerator. And nothing on the other side of the glass.